Welcome to the recording of Next 100's Ocean Equity Collective's Language Guide webinar. Unfortunately, we had a little bit of tech issues and the first part of the recording was lost. So we have the second half of the recording here for you to be able to watch and enjoy. We start right at the great succinct moment of Karen Bigelow speaking to why we thought that this was an important resource to build. And because the first part of the webinar has been cut off, I want to take a moment to introduce the people that you will be seeing on screen. So firstly, myself, the facilitator, Helen Smith. I am the policy advocate with Creation Justice Ministries. Next we have Mariana del Valle Prieto Cervantes, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives with Green Latinos. We also have Jane Au, the Program Director of Aina Mamona, and Karen Bigelow, Co-Executive Director of Creation Justice Ministries. As we say in this webinar several times, that this is a growing and changing guide. We don't want this to be the end-all be-all. We want it to grow with our communities, and we welcome feedback. And again, thank you so much for watching.
And I think it's important for us to have this language guide, not just for the words that are being used, but also to make sure that we have shared definitions and accountability that can come along with that. And then the last thing, I already touched on this a bit, but language is important because it has the ability to make people feel safe and welcomed. And I think that's so important in this space because I have found that the conservation space sometimes can be one of the more exclusive spaces that I've been at as a professional. And I think language is so important because I've been in spaces where they say, well, Black people don't care about conservation, literally, or being in spaces where they talk about things, even talk about racial equity, but somehow still in their language completely erase the very people that they're not trying to cause harm by. And so saying and so for us, it's so important that we do this work and do it in a way where our language is really just that foundational part about how we move forward. And if we can get the language right, it at least puts us in a better space to be able to work together. But that's just a few of my remarks. And I'll turn it back over, I believe, to Helen so that we can get into a little bit more discussion about this.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And I realize I failed to identify which organization I work for. So I am Helen Smith, and I work for Creation Justice Ministries as well, and I am our policy advocate. And I want to thank Karen and Jane and Mariana for those remarks and for kind of getting us started on how we got here. And I would love to open it up for discussion if anyone has thoughts or questions. We also have some other thoughts prepared, but we want to make sure that we are truly making this a working guide. We want this to have feedback from a lot of other BIPOC communities and be able to consistently update it so that it is not just our 6 organizations' thoughts on this, but it is a huge collaboration of thoughts. And so feel free to either raise your hand or put something in the chat. But as y'all either digest or think of questions, I think one question that
I have a question.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
I'm curious about your experience with the word conservation, as it has an interesting history. There have been discussions of other words. Could you share that?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Jane's internet got a little funky, so she had to drop off. And if she's able to hop back on, I would love to hear from an Indigenous Hawaiian perspective in addition to a mainlander perspective. But I can say that we spent a lot of time on the word conservation, even from the inception of our collaborative. We had a 4-week-long visioning session, and we really kind of looked at how do we do this? How do we move forward with this? Many of our communities are doing conservation in the everyday. A lot of the conversations I have, like I was talking with one of my colleagues, and he and I are both Black. And so I was like, yeah, of course we're doing conservation. I have all of the margin jars that are now Tupperware in my fridge, and I have my huge bag of grocery bags that I've been using totes for years. I don't know how the grocery bags keep going to my house, but now they're my trash can liners or my shower caps or my this or my that. And he literally went, oh, I have mine too, and just pulled up his bag as well. And I think so many minority communities, I've seen that happen with Indigenous peoples, I've seen that happen with Latino people. I've seen so many other communities relate to those little things that are sustainable practices, that are conservation. And so I think when we addressed it, we were kind of like, how do we put into this word the things that we watch our community do, that they may not say, I'm a conservationist, and like they don't ever have to identify themselves in that way. But we tried to find a definition that really kind of captured what we hope conservation will be, and what we see reflected in our communities. And I would love if Karen or Mariana, you have anything to add to that, please jump in.
No, yeah, for sure. I think we have the same feeling, right, when it comes to conservation cultura, is what we call it. And yes, we have our drawer full with like reusable and plastic bags that we reuse over and over again. We have, our butter. I can't believe it's not butter containers that have frijoles in it. My mom I would love what she would do with glass containers that had mole in it. She would take out the peel, and those became our water glasses to drink water. So that's something that's definitely embedded. That sometimes it's not seen as conservation, or our community doesn't see as conservation. But when you start to point those things out, it's, oh, we're already part of the solution. We have been part of the solution since the beginning, and we just need to go back to our roots and kind of explore that. So that's something that I definitely have seen in the community. And to Helen's point, it's something that we grappled a lot with in thinking about what the definition of conservation means, and how does that pertain not just to place but to people, and that interconnectedness of people.
Hello, can you all hear me good? I definitely do have a few questions on my end. First of all, my name is Cornell Toribio. I am with the Continental Divide Trail Coalition. We work here in the states, in 5 states actually, of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. I am the regional representative here in New Mexico. And I am Indigenous, and I am from the Pueblo of Acamas, where I'm from. Definitely, my hat's off to what you're doing here, and what you're talking about. Definitely is amazing to hear how you're definitely working on the language, and definitely of definitions of what that means. One of the things that I struggle with is the word actually conservation. When we do study the word conservation, we look into it, it actually has the word con in it. So my question is, what are we actually emphasizing on when we talk about conservation? Are we talking about it to benefit us as humans, or are we talking about it to benefit the land itself? And so when we talk about conservation, we're talking about manipulation. We're talking about changing it to fit our needs and not the needs of those the voices that we can't hear. Those voices that we can't hear are, of course, the trees, the plants, the fish, the animals. So definitely, I think, do you understand? I think Mika, do I have your name right there? Oh yes, okay, thank you. Definitely, when I was listening to her talk about, what are different type of words that you can actually look at using other than the word conservation. And a good example is, and I love the idea of what you used earlier about how Indigenous stewardship is totally different from this Western conservation supremacist approach, if I may add that word in there. And so, it really definitely it hits home when you when you listen to that word, but when we talk about indigenous stewardship, we talk about a whole different approach, because we're not talking about viewpoints the way you would with Western conservation. Western conservation is more based on views, because when we view it in a Western conservation approach, we're talking about how can we utilize this area to benefit us. And so when we talk about indigenous stewardship, then we talk about values. Values is, how is this going to benefit 7 generations down from now? So those are, definitely 2 different types of, groups of areas of study that definitely, I think, play a big part in this, because of the fact that, we want to talk about in the future about code stewardship. We want to talk about land back. We want to talk about these other kind of bigger issues that go on. And so, better understanding and better implementing new ideas into this language, that you're putting together, which I think is so phenomenal. I mean, I created a hiking guide for the Continental Divide Trail Coalition, and what we've been doing with the guide, it's universal. We've been actually working with our indigenous communities, and we have changed the wording into their language. And so now we're actually engaging, doing hiking programs with our indigenous communities, teaching them the language and really focusing on the language and the culture that goes behind it, a lot of what you're doing. And I just want to, commend you on all of that. And I just wanted to share that really quick. Thank you, though, for giving me that time to speak.
Absolutely. Yeah. And thanks for sharing. And I appreciate Mariana putting the definition we came to in the chat, so everyone can read it. I know some people are auditory and some people are visual like me. So we have that there, and of course are always open to feedback. We'll be able to put in the chat in a little bit a Google form where people can give us their feedback on it. And of course, we really encourage as many questions as we can get from our allies, and as much feedback as we can get from our fellow Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color, recognizing that this is a resource by us, and one that's meant to benefit us, while being able to educate some of our white allies. Bianca, I see your hand.
Right, thank you. I was really hoping to have a bit of Jane's input. I don't see that Jane is back yet.
Yes, we're working on getting her back on.
I guess then to sort of share with everyone first, it really stuck out hearing this discussion on lived experts versus learned experts. And right now it's the discussion that my department is having, and wanting to, oh great, I see that she's joining back. And wanting to, for me personally, understand how to refer to these lived experts. In the literature that I've read, I've come across Indigenous wisdom, and understanding that it's very pointed in not calling it science, and it's scientific in its traditional and long-standing approach, but not in its Western sort of definition. And I would love to be able to give it the credit that it's merited. So I'm wondering what the conversation is right now around that lived expert or Indigenous wisdom, and how can I honor the science behind it? What are we calling it is my question, if that's clear.
Yeah, totally. Jane, I know you were just able to hop back on, so I don't know if you got most of the question or if you heard part of it as you connected to audio, but your opinion was greatly valued for this one. Asking, how are we referring to Indigenous knowledge with the acknowledgement that it is science, and that Western science is not the only science. And so would love your opinion on kind of how people can or should phrase that, recognizing that sometimes when we say lived and learned expert, people disregard.
Yeah, absolutely. Mahalo nui for the question. I think that's a really important one. Honestly, I think just making a concentrated effort to, in your own circles and your own work, consider it science. It's very difficult to get those in the scientific community on board for that often, because they have their own scientific method, their own historical approach, and their own, you might even call it a genealogy of how they created their specific systems. But we have our own genealogies of knowledge and our own ways of knowing. Something that we've started to do here in the Pacific is centered in language as well. When we talk about our indigenous like land management systems, we call them technologies. We use the word technologies, we use the word science in describing our ancestral methods, because there's this tendency to think that because those happened in a specific period of time before the white Western world had discovered evolution and all of these things, that anything that happened before then isn't science. It can't be science. It happened from a different kind of mindset, but that's not the case. I mean, you look at indigenous people in Polynesia, and we were traveling the globe without modern science. We were able to feed ourselves on small islands with millions of people in our population without, this quote unquote Western science. And so just making a concentrated effort via language to describe and discuss traditional ecological knowledge as a science, or our lived experts as scientists. Just kind of working within our own frameworks to do that and make those little changes, I think will be a big help. And those greater entities will follow suit when the people on the ground are making a call for a more robust and wide definition of science.
Yeah. Any other questions anyone has? Feel free to come off mute or raise a hand, put it in the chat, whichever the things works best for you. And in the meantime, as we continue to think about some other questions, one of the things that came up, I think, Karen, as you were talking, was the concept of co-creation. And I know that we give a definition for co-stewardship and co-management in our language guide, but I would love if you could give an example of kind of what stage co-creation could start at. What if someone has an idea in their mind, how soon should they be coming to our communities to talk about it?
I mean, I guess for me, I would say pretty immediately. And so I think once it's got to the point where it can no longer have shape, or I find that sometimes feedback, once it has a full concept or even a full like briefing paper, and sometimes there are people who want to see a full concept before they agree to something, but I find that sometimes when people come with a fully thought out proposal, sometimes it stifles it, because then at that point you're just reacting to it as opposed to shaping it. And so to me, I think it's important to come back with ideas, or come when there's an idea, and then if necessary, go back, write it out, bring the proposal and then bring it back. And I think sometimes one of the characteristics of white supremacy in the workplace can be rushing stuff and making things go, just making things be fast. But sometimes in order to truly do co-creation, it means sometimes you have to go through multiple drafts, or you have to go through multiple steps. And that may mean that you have to go to someone, come back, and then go back to them again. But for the sake of relationship, it's important to go back as many times as necessary in order for the co-creation to truly happen. And so, yeah, for me, it starts at the beginning and not in the middle of the process.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. Thank you. And such a great negative wisdom. We may have to have multiple drafts. It won't come together immediately. And I would love to ask a question actually to the audience. If there's anything that you have feedback on later, fantastic. But I think one of the big things we want to know is, since this is a working guide, how often would you like to see us publishing updates? Is this something that every 6 months, once a year. Obviously, we would want to update it with the cycle of feedback that we get. So if we don't have feedback in 6 months, we're going to leave it as is. But we want this to be helpful. And so if there are thoughts on how frequently updates should be released, we would love to know that information. And then, of course, a huge thing is any words or terms that you think we have missed in definition. I know even as others were speaking, I was like jotting down like, oh, we should look at defining this or that. So yeah, Angelo.
Hey, sorry I was a little late.
No worries.
I flew in from Miami today and I lost track of time. You know, I subscribe to the belief that nobody ever reads reports. And so I do think that regular updates are important. But I also think just, thinking of a strategy of how to communicate this and how to make this part of like everyday language. And it's a combination of, honestly, like creating some memes. Like in my head, I'm imagining the one with the guy with the girl where he's looking over his shoulder at the other girl, and like there could be a funny one there. But if there are articles you could write or like editorials that we could write, and I'm happy to I love volunteering for stuff like that. Just to kind of to make this part of everybody's everyday language. Like it's not just enough to put it in a report. It's we want to make this part of like everyday happening. And I think those things can come more often. Not every day, but at a more common occurrence than the updates to the report. But hey, everybody, nice to see y'all.
Thank you. That's actually super helpful. And I think that's a great idea. Always easier to catch someone's attention with a funny meme or an article. Yeah, that's a good one.
Hi, y'all. I'm going to jump into, I have kids playing Mario Legos in the background, so you'll get some background noise. I would also love, I saw the suggestions there on like a 6-month window. Like I'm thinking of twice a year updates as feedback comes in. It sounds like a good cadence. And I'd also love to be able to lean on some of the wisdom in this space, as I know there's different parts of our organization that are taking on like an inclusive language guide and equity filters and things like that. So just kind of sharing like best practices, lesson learned, things as they come up. So whether that comes up in a forum of like a once a year getting together, or just creating some of those spaces, Layla, stop, creating some of those spaces so that we can lean on each other as we're going through this work in our organizations would be super awesome.
Yeah, that sounds really great, and definitely something to think about and figure out how to incorporate in. I know I've seen a couple of other comments about how to work this in organizationally, and I think someone said something about how to work it in when you've got some added bureaucracy layers over top to figure out how to make waves without making too many waves. And I appreciate the comment about stewardship and kind of how to look at that, as well as looking at stakeholder and what does that mean, and is that really the best word to use. I think there's going to be a lot of words for us to consider at our next monthly meeting. Yeah.
Can I ask something, Helen?
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how much visibility something like this powerful document has, because even with this question of stakeholder, I recently heard that. And for me, that was a first, especially coming from, a few years ago after grad school, being advised to look at jobs with stakeholder in the title. And it was beyond me that it was potentially inappropriate or overlooking or disempowering people. And so I'm wondering how much visibility what you all are doing has in order to start working with more people so that this is not, for a select few people that are really engaged or also aren't leaving people out that just haven't heard about this yet. Because I think this is wonderful. Everyone should hear about it.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's one of the things we're working on. We're of course always happy to have people share it, and we're recording tonight so that other people can come back and see this. And I know, I think within our group, we have been telling basically everyone we know about this guide, hoping that it can reach past ocean conservation, because while we do have a couple of specific definitions or examples that relate to our experiences with ocean conservation, we really do want this to be something that can be used beyond just conservation or even beyond environmentalism. So I think part of it is we're working pretty hard on getting it out there as much as we can with as many people as we can. And we also rely on you all who are here and believe in it to share it with others and have your network see it as well.
The thing that I'm actually considering when hearing this discussion is some of the work that I also do that's bilingual. And now thinking about how do I translate some of these important words and definitions into other languages, and also communicate to other communities the power of words, because I think that maybe that's the next hurdle, but the power of words in other languages. And one of the things that my department is talking about is how to name some of these terms in other languages when it hasn't been named yet, and working together with others to do that.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I saw Mariana reacted to that, and of course we had like a long discussion about whether or not to put this in other languages and to have other languages. And I would love to let Mariana speak a little bit more to that, and like the struggle of figuring this complex thing out over multiple linguistics.
Yeah, I think for us, it was, this is the beginning. I think it's the beginning for even the English version, but really to start to think about how communities in other languages are talking about ocean conservation, and how is that harmful and how is it helpful? I think is kind of the questions that we have in mind, particular for me, for our Spanish speaking communities. And I know we've also talked about other languages. So that's kind of where we are right now with that conversation, and would love to, if anybody's kind of thinking about that or working with communities, and there's some terms that we would want to include, we're happy to kind of think through that. But it's something that we're also considering. But we thought that English would be the first step, and then we can go from there as far as other languages go.
Any other thoughts?
I just wanted to kind of note, bridging off of that, talking about other languages, I do think that when we get a good focus on the English, that would be another really cool thing to do with this guide, is include terms that are in Spanish or in Native Hawaiian and start to push those into modern mainstream conservation movements as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be phenomenal, and just something that we are very excited about and passionate about. I want to go ahead and have us share our feedback form. I know we're reaching our last 10 minutes, and so I want to make sure that you guys have access to that and have the ability to give us feedback. And we, of course, just want to continue this discussion with y'all, and to be able to continue to make resources that are helpful for all of our communities. I recognize we're reaching our last couple of minutes. Angelo, yeah.
Can I just say something that just may be super obvious to everybody on the screen? I want to apologize on behalf of my gender. I find, like, I was at the International Marine Conservation Congress. No, it was the International Marine, yeah, the impact. And there was a session of indigenous peoples, mostly Pacific Islanders, men and women, and men did all the talking. Then created absolutely no space for the women. I just look at the screens, I look at the faces on the screen, and there's a dynamic in indigenous communities where women do all the work, but men take all the credit. And I think with this work that you're doing right now, there's something similar. And so I think we also need to come up with a plan to how to get more men to show up to these events, to these discussions. And I'm committed to help with that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think that's a good thing to point out when we see an inequity, how we can make it better or make it change. And I just want to open it up for any closing thoughts from any of our panelists today, Jane or Karen or Mariana.
I just wanted to thank everyone for taking the time to be here with us. It was really great to share this document, and we do really want everyone's input and feedback. So please, when you have the time, share your thoughts with us so that we can really make this a strong, collective, growing document. But mahalo everyone for taking some time out of your busy day to be with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you everyone for just staying with us on, at least for those on the East Coast, for this late time or in the evening. But I really appreciate this. I almost wish we had more time because I think there's so many rich terms that we could talk about that were brought up in the chat. And so I'm excited for us to be able to talk about these terms more, but then also I'm wondering just from a Next 100 Ocean Equity Collective, how can we create space to maybe talk about these terms a little bit more in detail, almost have a bit of a parlor to go over these words and getting to definitions that feel less harmful and more inclusive to different communities and based on our lived experiences, how should they be defined? And so for me, I'm just excited for the opportunity that we can have moving forward. Thank you, everyone.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Omni Glacias. I think the only thing I'll add is I'm really excited for this space, excited to how we can build more spaces like this. And please, share far and wide, and bring a friend next time, and let's keep growing this movement.
Yeah, and I just want to close this out by saying thank you so much for being here, for being engaged with this work, and wanting to see change and doing the mental gymnastics that it takes to really overcome what feels almost inherent sometimes when we've been really subjected to oppression or harm, and to kind of untangle, decolonize our language, and recognize everyone whose work goes into just keeping nature and keeping all of creation a beautiful place. So we'll let you all go back to the rest of your days. Hope you have a great week. And thank you again for being with us.
Thank you.